Welcome to another AI Snack episode of my AI literacy podcast, AI Snacks with Romy and Robbie, where we unpack the real science and strategy behind the AI revolution, one conversation at a time. I'm your host, Anastassia, founder and CEO of AI Edutainment, a company bringing AI literacy into 1 million families and 100,000 companies. Today, we are joined by Joseph or Joe Miller, and he's a co-founder and chief AI officer at Vivon. There, he's building AI sales agents that don't just chat, they decide and act like elite technical sellers. So let's investigate whether these agents reason as well and what reasoning constitutes when it comes to AI and machine learning today. Joe is a physicist by training. He has a PhD in biomedical engineering from Cornell. He has spent his career at the intersection of deep science and high-stakes enterprise systems, from particle accelerators and systematic trading at Bridgewater to founding and leading AI startups. At Vivon, he's not just applying LLMs, he's adding ontologies and knowledge graphs into them, which in his view brings the AIs into a mode similar to what animals and humans are doing, and this is the reasoning mode. Most current LLMs are brilliant pattern matchers, but they struggle with genuine reasoning, especially in complex, high-stakes domains like enterprise sales and engineering. They can generate fluent text and plausible answers, but they often miss causal relationships. They fail to maintain consistent context over long chain, and they can't reliably distinguish what they know from what they are guessing. And Joe argues that to build AI that can reason and understand, we need to move beyond scaling data and parameters and instead embed explicit structured knowledge into our models. And this is not just about fine-tuning the documents. We need, as a result, an agent that doesn't just retrieve text, but reasons over structured definitions, business rules, and expert workflows. And those ontologies and knowledge graphs represent a world model for such an AI. And this world model helps the agent to understand of what good look like and what is allowed and how different pieces of information relate in the context. At the end of this episode, Joe will tell us something about his vision on the future of humanity with AIs. And I hope that your takes from this vision won't be resignation or fear, but it will be a decision to invest more time into learning about AI and robotics. And frankly, your job, the future of your company, depends on how much you know about your domain and about technology. So grab your favorite snack and a cup of coffee, lean in, and let's dive into what it really takes to build AI that understands your business. Hi, Joe. Welcome to my studio.
Thanks for having me.
And Joe, I will start with showing you two books. And one book is brilliantly written. It's a brilliant thinker and writer. And I think he caused a lot of confusion and, frankly, in my eyes, even damage to the world of AI. And this is Yuval Harari.
Nexus, okay.
Yeah, so he's talking about agents being independent and making all kind of decisions and really kind of, stepping into the life of humans and changing this life forever. And whenever I'm confronted with these books, and actually I got 8 copies of this one for Christmas, everyone kind of, was seduced to send me one of those. Yeah. I was kind of, can I give you another read? And this is Julia Pearl, The Book of Why. And this is actually one of my favorites. I must admit, for people who are not skilled in reading, let's say, math and science, it's slightly slow to read and to digest. But in my eyes, this is one of the best books written. And this is very dear to me because this is about our subject today. And can we please first try to dissect what are current limitations in large language models? Why do we have those limitations? And why did we fail to embed causality and reasoning in the human sense of this world into this technology?
Man, we're starting out with the big ones. I love it. Okay, so the the way that I view this, I'll try not to be too technical about it. But the way that, all of our LLMs, our agent architecture since like 2017, they've been based on this concept called the transformer model. That's sort of the revelation that has happened, is this transformer model concept. Embedded in the transformer model is this process that is, from the neural network process in the feed forward mechanism of how it trains itself. What happens is that as you bring in training data, this process sort of breaks it up into all of these sort of abstract, hidden layers and nodes and such. And then there's these weights that get what we call back propagated against the outcome. So let's say, you feed in a picture of a cat, the model predicts that it's a dog, or you might say like, the cat, and then what's the next word? The next word should be purred or something, and maybe the model goes through all the processes and all the weights and biases compute that the cat barked. And you say, no, that's not right. It is wrong by this amount. And so then you back propagate that error, that difference from what you got from what you wanted. You back propagate that across all of these weights in this very clever way. And it updates the weights, right? So then you feed in another picture or another string of text like the cat, and it eventually says purred, and you say, great, you've don't modify the weights, you've gotten it right? So this process is very, very different learning process than the way humans go through things. And so the contrast between those two books you have is that agents are based on this way of learning through this stochastic gradient descent mechanism of backpropagation, all this stuff. And the problem is that it buries the lead. So if you were to break down this math, what you'd end up having is a bunch of implicit causal assumptions through this abstract space that gets you to the right answer. And what you reward, in other words, when you update the weights, what you reward there is not that path. It is just the outcome. So you rewarded that the cat purrs, and then you reward that and you cement that into the weights, but you didn't reason about why the cat purrs. So there's no mechanism to get you from the cat to the cat purrs other than the stochastic association process. And now language is a very tricky thing, because the reason that we develop language is to, this is like a Wittgensteinian way of thinking about the world, but we're pointing toward meaning. We are pointing toward symbolism. And so the language can evolve, that meaning can evolve through society. We could change these definitions and such. And so language is really like almost like an emergent phenomena that represents the real world. And so the reason that LLMs and agents now look so convincing and like the Turing test way, so to speak, is because it is modeling a thing, language, very well. And language itself embeds a bunch of causality, but it is not causality. And so that's the crux of the problem, is that LLMs do not have any causal view of the world. They have an associative view about a language, and language has some embedding of causality in it. And so I think that's the crux of the problem. And the way that you can prove that is, for example, you can ask an LLM, give me a recipe for some dish. I'll use like this. I have this paper here that I use this example of eggs Benedict. And I said, give me the recipe for eggs Benedict. And it gives me this recipe. Great. Now let's imagine that my LLM is like in a robot, which we will soon all have in our houses. And I can actually do this. I'll be like, give me that recipe for eggs Benedict. Okay, now go cook this for me. And so it'll go to the stove and it will respect that recipe, right? The recipe it just came up with. Now, here's the thing. And this is like the way I best illustrate it, is that now imagine it's, tomorrow and it's forgotten about the recipe, or you have a new robot or whatever. And you say, go cook me some eggs Benedict. It will not respect the recipe it just gave you the day earlier. It's a different thing. That's not the way that it's actually thinking. The recipe does not actually exist anywhere. It is a composition of this latent space stuff that's going on. And it only existed when you asked of it. And that's the problem, is that there's no actual world model that is walking around in the LLM. And so when you ask it questions that, without trying to enforce a world model on it, either by giving it one or by asking it to define one that it will respect, it won't respect. It'll come up with whatever is the natural world model of whatever you were just discussing. And so you'll get a different recipe of eggs Benedict. And I think that that is the mechanism of like causality doesn't work that way. Causality works only by proposing a mechanism. So you a priori have to propose a world model. You think the world works through A causes B, that causes C. Okay, now we can go test that because you've defined a mechanism from A to C. But without that, you do not have causality. You have correlation between these things.
Whenever I teach AI to MBAs, I'm always referring to a kind of a baseline against which a system performs. And babies, human babies or cat babies, are born with an innate world model. So they understand that, so this is a down and this is up, and they don't have any sense of the scientific concepts of gravity, but somehow they understand what gravity is. They understand what light is if they're not blind. And human babies are very fine to differentiate between human and non-human languages. And of course, for an LLM, this thing doesn't grasp. It's a language. It's some kind of a stream, but what is inside of a stream, it's completely foreign to this alien I would now use the word organism, right? Though, of course, this is not in the biological sense of the world. And I'm sometimes trying to educate my students about the issue of catastrophic forgetting, which to my knowledge has not been solved. And this is what you've described. Your system forgot all about the Benedicts from yesterday. So today, this is something completely outlandish because it did not have the concept in the first place and it forgot. And of course, so you are currently building agents which have to grasp a certain context in a certain enterprise and a certain business function. So the architectures are not perfect with so many issues not resolved currently. So how do you address this issue and how do you embed the real life context into those imperfect LLMs?
Yeah. So I'll give you like a small background to make this make sense, because the answer that we've gone down with the path is sort of like an old fashioned answer. It is you should build ontologies, you should build knowledge graphs, you should link your data and build the world model, right? You should give it a world model so that that's permanent outside of it, right? So that's a little bit like us. Like, we used to think that like the babies, on your point, were born with a blank slate. And now we know that that's not true. They are born with these innate concepts of like up and down a relation and time, and all of this stuff comes very, very, very early. All kinds of interesting baby experiments there that prove that. And this is the thing, is that what that world model is pointing to is an objective reality. And that objective reality, by definition, exists outside of the baby. And so that's the sort of interesting thing that's happened, is that somehow we've encoded in our DNA when a child is born that it has some knowledge of that world outside of it, because that world outside of it is true for everybody that exists in that world, right? And so it's useful to code, right? It's a useful thing to be born with the knowledge of. LLMs are not born with any of that, right? They're just getting it purely from language and language alone. And so the way that you have to give it that. And the way that we give it is through ontologies and knowledge graphs and such. But the thing that's really, I think that's sort of, it's a weird situation that we're in right now, because prior to Transformer success, that would be sort of the good old fashioned way of thinking about semantic reasoning, symbolic reasoning, all of that type of stuff. And for the last, call it 70 years, I have noticed that like AI has like two tracks. One is like symbolic reasoning and this sort of thing. And the other is like machine learning. And the two of them sort of like, the AI winters are sort of like the hype of machine learning. Oh, we don't have enough data or compute. And then symbolic reasoning sort of comes up again to save the day. And then it runs into problems like psych and infinite numbers of ontologies and edge cases and all of that. And then it falls off. And then meanwhile, the internet comes out and suddenly we have a bunch of data and compute. And then there's you keep going through like these oscillating cycles. And I think what's happened now that is unique in history is that both approaches are really at this beautiful peak. People understand how to use graph theories and knowledge graphs and all of this type of stuff. And we have the compute, and we have the machine learning, and we have the transformers working. And so what I look at is like the LLM being like this unbelievable technology that's come forward to serve as like the communication, like the mouthpiece to a brain that we've known how to build for a long time, but you couldn't ever communicate with it. So, or at least you couldn't in any natural language sense. You had to sort of a priori know the things you were going to ask of it and then build giant dashboards for it. And that's like the last 20 years of SaaS, right? So that's sort of what's gone on there. And now you have this new form factor to engage. You have both the mouthpiece and in some sense the hands of agents and stuff, tool calls and all this type of stuff. And you have this way of codifying particular knowledge or domain knowledge and such. And so when you put that all together, is the magic that is happening right now. I think that is an exceptional thing. And in business, it matters to have this other side because people build trust through understanding why. So the book of why is well named. It's like, we're interested in understanding, why do you say the things you're saying, LLM or agent? Why are you deciding to do what you're doing? Give me the reasons why. And then I can like validate whether or not I believe that that's true. Like I can disagree with your premises or whatever. And knowledge graphs give you the ability to produce justification for claims.
So this is so interesting what you are saying about the convergence of, let's say, two big paths in the evolution of AI. And I think that so-called hybrid architectures is the way to go right now. It's kind of sad for me if we go just into the path of scaling LLMs for all kind of reasons. And they are very energy unsavvy, and they will always hallucinate and make mistakes, because obviously there is this kind of, borderline between just looking into the search and retrieval problem, parroting the outcomes without true understanding, and on another hand, all the limitation of the symbolistic path. But I'm quite curious, and maybe you define ontology and a knowledge graph for those who are not familiar with the concept. I mean,
Sure.
in living organisms, so the brains evolved, and it came from, let's say, the most primitive worm to what we have as a human being. And we can actually dissect what pieces of brain are in charge of what. And for example, this reasoning and causality, reasoning is because mammals can exercise causality. It's partly it's being said by the evolutionary biologists that this is due to this imaginarium. So it's playing in head scenarios which have not occurred yet and imagining things which are not from the experience, but that they might occur. And this is, for example, why humans, obviously mammals, have such extended childhood. So the kids, they are playing all kind of scenarios like I'm a pirate, I'm a princess, so we are dressing up. And they're imagining things which are not true for their lives. But in those scenarios, they're learning causal relationships between actions, between things. And this is how they further learn to reason and to understand. So far, none of the paths, not this, let's say, brute force machine learning path and symbolistic path, possess this imaginarium, learning in what is not currently true, what might occur, but has not been here yet. How do you think about this dilemma? And please define ontology and knowledge graph for people who are not familiar with the concepts.
Yeah, that's interesting. So the quick definition of ontology is just basically like a way of defining your meanings. So you could say I have this entity, it has these properties. This is like what I mean by this thing. And the knowledge graph, a way to think about that would be like that the connection of these sorts of things. So like, how do they relate to one another? It's literally a graph where you're composed of nodes and edges that connect the nodes. And on these edges, you could say like it is, the cat makes the sound purr, right? This sorts of stuff. But it defines through these constructs, you define a sort of world model where it's like, what are the things that exist in the world and how do they relate to one another? And so when you think about what imagination is like a set of, if you loosen this definition to a little bit of like, there's probable things and there's possible things. And what you have is sort of a meandering, like a random walk through this space, or like hypothesis drawing of, could this thing connect to this thing in some way? Like, what would it mean for a dog to purr? Right? That's an imagination thing that we have. It's not in your world model. It's not a probable or possible thing, or maybe it's possible, who knows? But you would have to be saying, well, what would have to be different about the dog in order for it to make the sound purr? I guess like the point I'd make at is this, is that once you impose a world model that is well defined through an ontology or a knowledge graph, then the concept of imagination is sort of trivial. It's sort of this idea of like, yeah, I'm just drawing connections between things that are not connected, or I'm imagining paths that didn't actually happen. And so in causal reasoning, we call this like counterfactual reasoning. We
Yeah.
say, if the world were different, that is, you can't do counterfactual reasoning in an LLM. The world can't be different than it is. Like if I said, what if I tell the LLM, what would you say to this answer to question X if I had asked it in this different way? The problem is that because it's auto-regressive, you already asked it this way. So that is now part of the answer to the thing that you just asked. And if you ask that, if you created a new LLM, ask this in isolation, it won't be the same thing that you were asking before. So you have this like aspect to it to the stream in which you were engaging with the LLM. Whereas when you have a world model and you ask counterfactual things, you are asking something different about a permanent structure. So I think imagination, innovation, all of these sorts of things are often like I sort of visualize them as like I am playing, literally, quite literally playing with this world model. I'm imagining like how can I connect this dot to like this really far dot away. In my doctoral work, in my academic work, I was somewhat noted for doing this. I had a dissertation that was half a nuclear fusion proposition and a theory of cancer cell invasion from thermodynamic principles. And I invented a microscope and a nuclear weapons detection system. And I just did a bunch of random stuff, right? And I had a 2-year residency in neurosurgery and all of this different stuff. And people often ask me like, how are you innovative in this way? And I'm like, that is literally what I'm doing. I think imagination is I'm just saying, hey, how do I connect this concept in economics to this aspect of this cancer cell? What does it mean to connect like a ball that rolls down a hill to the way, cancer is pushing through the boundary of your tumor or whatever it is, or like whatever, how people operate in the cities and how traffic works is like, why is that going to be any different than the way birds fly through the air? Like you just imagine you're just grabbing nodes in this world model and then trying to create a trace through them. And that respects physics, right? That respects just basic physics. But even then you can bend that too. That if you want practical innovation, you have to respect physics. But if you want just imagination, then you don't. You can imagine what it's like to have a cat be the size of a house. But obviously in physics, that wouldn't work. You couldn't actually scale a cat to the size of a house, right? Like dragons, those giant dragons, like somewhat have a problem with physics, right? So you're in some sense, but it's easy to imagine such a thing because it's just trivial, right? So you're just changing the property of a node of a thing. And you're like, yeah, what if that scale was gigantic? What if it was purple? What if it, had a horn? What if I took a thing from this thing and put it on that thing? Like it's easier to imagine that sort of abstract play when you have a world model that what the manipulations mean in the world model. I'm either drawing new nodes or I'm tracing a different path than what actually happened, or I'm changing the properties on some of the nodes or edges. Those are like the
A,
three
cou-
ways.
a couple of things. I mean, you're obviously a Renaissance type of a person. So you are innovating because you are knowledgeable across different disciplines. And actually, this is how a lot of innovation occurs. It's rarely, let's say, in a vertical, but innovation quite often happens on the borderline between different fields, areas. But I mean, when it comes to AI and realization, so AIs, if I'm very primitive in describing what is going on there, those are collections of points and clouds. And let's say if you are in a certain neighborhood and you are discovering, let's say, the anomalies in an X-ray picture, I mean, of course, a human eye does not have the physiological properties to see every single, I don't know, shadow. And an AI can be very, very powerful in saying, so this is something strange. And then, of course, it might be cancer. But let's say if you ask the same AI to, let's say, compose a poem, you might receive a Tour Eiffel, which stands next to the Colosseum, which was a real mistake of the early ChatGPT, right? So I understand that when you build real world products, enterprise type of products, and you kind of, augment LLMs with ontologies and knowledge graphs, you receive, let's say, quite a dedicated area of points and clouds. You are staying in a certain domain. And I guess, I'm not saying it's trivial and easy, but I guess you can do it and you can achieve fantastic results. If you kind of, ask the same system to jump into something completely different, is it easy to do?
Yeah, so I think that ontologies and knowledge graphs are wildly flexible. So you do have to go do some work to define them. Right now there's a lot of research in trying to get LLMs to go define them. Maybe they can do that, right? Which I think is very interesting research. I think eventually that will be the case, that things will work that way. Like AIs can do causal discovery. They might not literally know the way that they stumbled upon it, but it doesn't change the fact that proposing a causal DAG or a causal world model, for example, even randomly, once it's randomly generated, you can validate whether or not it's true. So in most cases, right? Or in some cases, I should say, maybe most cases is not the right way to say it, but in some cases, you can validate whether or not it's true. So it doesn't really matter if you came up with it on accident or not. You can have like the Getty A problem doesn't really matter. So once you have these things though, let's say like for example, Vivin has a agent we call Ava, and she's a sales agent. So she joins calls and she helps people sell the product. And she has all the technical knowledge of your product, right? And so that is a very specific thing. We've defined a world model about what it is to be a salesperson. There's methodologies, but there's also like, what is a product? A product has capabilities. These capabilities solve pain points. Pain points are the things that are blocking somebody's from moving from their current state to the desired state, that, they have some strategy and problems that they overcome and the company goal, and competitors are doing XYZ, and there's gaps in the product and all of this stuff. So that's the kind of stuff that is in this world model. If I then go ask her to like I also, trade a lot. So I had fun for a while. If I asked her to come in and be like, now be an quant, so like be an analytical FX quant, that's not going to help her, right? Like now what's interesting is it's not that it's just not very helpful as it is. If I then go build a model, an ontology and the world knowledge graph about what it means to be FX quant, it's not necessarily the case that knowing this won't help this, because you have concepts of analogy. So it's not obvious how it would help it at all, but no lateral thinking is ever obvious. That's, that's sort of the magic of lateral thinking, is that it's not obvious. So, but you do need to move it. You can't just like say, hey, I've defined you in one domain, so therefore you automatically know something about another domain. That doesn't work that way, right? That's why like chess bots can't go play checkers. Like they need to know the rules. They need to know how the game works. So, and then it's not to say that like some strategy in chess can't inform your strategy in checkers, but they are distinctive things.
This is interesting. And I just wonder, so right now, all AIs are frozen when they're getting shipped. Obviously, they are being trained, so the database is getting updated, but then they are shut down and then they are shipped and delivered. Do you think at some point in time there might be a dynamic model which is not frozen and won't completely screw up when it's being used, so that it can really learn from the real-time questions of the users, and it's not just shifting vectors in the semantical space? It's really learning and not just trying to search through what is out there.
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's like the best place for the learning to exist in an LLM is in the weights. The problem is that like as long as you're using transformer models as is right now, then the way that data has to come in, if you wanted to encode, say, causality, you have to run the data through a world model that then goes and trains the transformer. That's not happening. That is a very difficult scaling problem right there. What is happening is, they retrain on all the latest data, that is the differential data on the internet since, March, whatever, right? And then that gets like baked into the weights. People also do things like fine tune modeling and whatever, all of this type of stuff. But it's not to say though that just because the information's not in the weights, that it doesn't like can't learn material. Like the world model, imposing an ontology knowledge graph world model sort of thing on the agent, even old agents or old LLMs, still brings it up to the same bar as new LLMs. I think this is a very interesting finding. So we just did this research where do this experiment where I say, hey, LLM, like go give me, here's an FOMC meeting notes minutes. Just build a world model out of it. Tell me what's in there. How is it related? How does it make sense? It goes and does that. Then I say, okay, now propose me some questions that only your world model would be able to answer. Like, according to your world model, rather, not really like only, but according to your world model, A to B to C to D, answer the question of like, how do you get from A to D, right? Like, You have the world model, you should be able to answer it. If you ask it that, like, and then ask it those questions, it will get them all right. Of course, it has the key to the test, right? That's what a world model does. And you're like, great. Now I shut the LLM down, I boot up a new one, and I give it the same FOMC meeting minutes, but I don't ask it to create the world model. But I do ask it the questions that it created itself. I did this experiment because there's a debate that the world model is in the latent space of the LLM, that it does actually exist. And my argument was like, no, it doesn't. And here's how you can prove it, right? So I let it come up with its own, ask its own questions, and then I shut it down. Now I'm just going to ask it the questions, but based with the same input that it produced the world model. So in theory, if it's in latent space, it should be able to answer all these questions. And it does spectacularly bad. It just falls off a cliff like very quickly. As soon as you need to go more than a couple hops, it just falls off a cliff. And then if you give it the world model that the original instance had, it will recover all the answers. It will get it all right. So it will use that world model. So that's the point, right? And what's interesting is that actually, if you do this, if you ask a very advanced model like GPT 5.2 or something to build the world model and the questions and do this experiment, it works great. But then if I say, I'm going to shut it down, I'm going to reboot, but I'm going to reboot like a much smaller model. Like I'm going to reboot 4.0 or 4.1. I'm going to give it the minutes and the questions, and then I'm going to give it and then it does bad. And then you give it the world model, it will also recover all of the answers. So the point is that like these things are really powerful to sort of get the practical benefits of that knowledge into the system. It doesn't need to have it in its weights. As long as it can like say, hey, whatever vectors and points and clouds I'm pointing to in embedding space, you are actively forcing me into other directions through this world model. You can actually get back the expert knowledge, even with a lower or less costly or smaller model.
It's interesting because if, let's say, the majority of those LLMs go the path of embedding ontology and world models into them, that will partly solve the issue of transparency. And this is, of course, the largest criticism. Obviously, all kind of artificial neural networks are intransparent. You can't really grasp what is going on in one or another hidden layer. I'm just wondering, in terms of investments, how much is going into this path of research versus, let's say, scale what we have?
Well, the money is certainly going into scale. The
Yeah.
argument, in venture and all of this, and in amongst the tech leaders, is that you will eventually be able to do this at scale. Like it will just emerge from more scale. I'm skeptical of that, but I was also skeptical that this was going to work at all. That transformer models were ever going to get better than Bert and Ernie, and or much better than that. And I was wrong about that. Emergent phenomena is very difficult to predict. It is. I mean, I'll just leave it at that. Is it
No.
possible that you could just keep throwing money and keep stacking transformers, and eventually some sort of emergent phenomena occurs that allows it to persist and build world? Sure, maybe. I think there's a much easier, cheaper way to do it. And I think that when we started doing this at Vivint maybe 2 years ago, it was not cool at all. Nobody was doing that. Everybody thought that was a silly thing to do because these models will just get better, and they'll have memory layers and all this other stuff, right? And you could just ask it to act like an expert or whatever. Prompt engineering was a thing for like 30 minutes. That was it, right? And so I think that that now everybody's realizing, for exactly the reason that you just said, like people want to know why did you say that? And the problem is that the LLM will tell you why, and you will believe it. That's the problem. It's not really why. That's not the right why. It's not true. It's like lying to you in a way that it sounds like that it really did it that way. Like it's giving you a path ad hoc that would work for the thing that it said. And so you think that's what it did, but that's not what it did. By definition, you can't be doing that. So
No, look,
that's the
yeah.
problem.
Look, I mean, you're kind of, this is exactly why I started AI Edutainment and started writing entertaining books about AI for families, not for, let's say, AI scientists, because I'm very fearful that the degrading of humanity will come from, let's say, false hopes and actually laziness. Because as biological beings, we love to cut corners and look for easy answers. And there is an interesting paper, it's completely not related to, architectures and technologies, but it's about productivity in the workforce. And this is a German paper And they are saying, oh, actually, those 45 years plus, they achieve productivity gains while using AI, but the youngster, they don't. And then actually, if you start reasoning, why is this the case? Well, of course, because those oldies, they have experience and they know exactly what question do they try to get an answer to when they use one or another technology. They are not blindly guessing or suggesting that this thing will replace whatsoever. So, and it's kind of, in the neighborhood to the movement and what maybe should be happening. And I'm very much against throwing money into the fire with scaling, let's say, vulnerable and deficient architectures. May I ask you, what is your opinion on what Stephen Wolfram is doing and, his Mathematica and Alpha? I must admit, I'm a huge fan,
Me
but
too.
so what is, okay, so you're too.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a big believer that I mean, it's not really a belief. It's more like this is just a reality of the world that there's different kinds of knowledge. And
Yeah.
this is the problem, I think, in popular discourse is that we treat knowledge like it's all knowledge, but there's different kinds of knowledge. There's like declarative knowledge and there's a procedural knowledge and tacit knowledge. And there's different languages that we use that are better or worse at expressing these sorts of things. Mathematics and computational language is the thing that, Stephen talks a lot about and that I think is really important is that like you don't need to asking an LLM math questions is sort of a silly thing to do. It's just like not the language that you would use to solve a math question. So it just doesn't make any sense to do it that way. So connecting like, the language aspect of things like natural language and then realizing, oh, I have a question about another language, mathematics in this example, I should go answer that question with the mathematical language or computational language and then bring the answer back to communicate it. That system makes a lot more sense to me. And so I'd say like, he's a big champion of that sort of behavior of system architectures and such. And then in general, I just think that he's like his new kind of science. All of a sudden, I think I have his books in the background here.
Same.
Uh, he's is absolutely brilliant. I think it's a very interesting way of thinking about the world. Like I said, I ran a hedge fund for a while, and it had huge impacts on the way I thought about markets and all kinds of stuff like that. So all kinds of like complex dynamics make sense through that lens. It's actually a very interesting space. But I think that all of that, you know, um, folds into the future of AI and the way we think about building these systems.
I've started writing the second volume of my Romy and Robbie AI series for kids and parents, and it will be about my protagonist translating the language of marine animals with help of AI using Wolfram.
Yeah, that's
So
great. I love it.
exactly, exactly. So, Joe, we can frankly chat probably for hours and hours, but I would love to ask now my last question. So, looking forward, how do you envision expert AI agents and humans working together um, in an enterprise and just in life? So, what is your vision for the future of work in this regard?
It's a big question. So I think I have like a somewhat dark expectation of it, but I am hopeful about the future. That's how I'll say it. So and it's mostly like through time is how I want to picture it. So starting all the way at the very end, like 1,000 years out or something, I expect a convergence of humans and chips. That's what I think our species will become. Is just sort of. I don't think there'll be like a them versus us. I don't think AI will destroy mankind. I know Yudkowsky is a big believer of this sort of apocalypse. He might be right, who knows? But I think what will likely happen is that you just have a convergence of humans, Homo sapiens as we know them, and AI chips that we built. And remember, like the AI chips, like their knowledge is based on our knowledge, right? So it's a little bit like it is a tool that we will integrate them into ourselves. I think that is the long run thing that ends up happening. And it may be this idea that like it's your mind, it's your cognitive structures and such that get downloaded into a chip and you have a robot body, but you just end up like you are still you in some ship of Theseus sort of way. That's the very long term thing that I think. I think then you bring this back and you say, okay, well, what happens to labor before we are integrated? What is going on with the acceleration of AI versus humans being able to use it? And I think this ends up looking like massive labor disruption. And so mostly I don't think you think that people will be replaced, like by and large, most of them. I think that the thing that doesn't get replaced is, or I think is likely not to be replaced is accountability and responsibility. It's a little bit, and the way I think about this is a little bit like, like nations taxing corporations. Like it's a very popular thing to talk about these days, especially at dinner tables at Thanksgiving or something. But but like there's an old, Milton Friedman was an old guy that used to say like corporations can't be taxed, only humans can be taxed. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that concept. Like corporations are not entities that can be taxed. Only humans can pay the tax. So it's either the shareholders that pay it or the employees or the customers. Somebody is being taxed. And it's the same thing here is like responsibility can only be held by a human. Accountability can only be held by the human. So somebody has to be accountable. You cannot justice will not be served by unplugging the computer that when it does something bad. You will not feel justice there. Somebody has to be responsible for the decisions the computer and the AI goes and does in the world. So I think that you'll have jobs that people think that are going to be, and then in the very short run along that thread, I think jobs that will be very disruptive or disrupted, or people that will think that it is going to be disrupted will likely not. And then things that people think will not be disrupted probably will be very disrupted. And that is things like lawyers, for example. Like lawyers, like that is a very popular thing to think AI does very good on writing your contracts and analyzing your contracts and such. But if I still get sued and I lose because my contract was weak, who pays the price? I am still the person that's responsible because I am ultimately the one that bears the consequences of the outcome, and AI will not. So that in that sense, I'll always want a lawyer because I want that person to bear the consequences. That's why I have a lawyer, is so I can force the consequences being bared to somebody else or share that risk. Same things with doctors. We know that like radiologists, AI radiologists are way better than human radiologists, but people don't trust it because they think they're special. And what they really mean is I want you, the human, to share in our humanness and my special case, that the AI is maybe not trained on or whatever. And that's according to the surveys and published work about why people don't trust AI radiologists. So I think that's again, it's about this responsibility bearing and this innate human thing. So I think things like that are going to always have some level of labor. Somebody has to bear it, but those people will bear an astronomical amount more than they are right now. And then the rest will just not have jobs. So I think that that's the way the world goes. It's kind of a dismal perspective, but I also think that like, it doesn't have to be. It is just the case that humans aren't, for all of our evolution, we have always traded our time and labor for value in the society, for meaning. And it's not obvious that that has to be the thing. Like your work does not have to be the reason that you are meaningful. And indeed, it's very rarely the case that it is. And yet it's deeply ingrained in us. So I think that you'll have a lot of like these societal shakeups and pushbacks and revolts against basically that underlying problem of like, if I can't exchange my time for money or my labor for money, like what can I do? How do I control my destiny, and how do I develop and produce meaning and value for society, et cetera? I think that would be the challenges that we have. And in the very, very short term, I think you'll probably get some productivity boosts. Well, as you basically have all things like people, like AI systems can scale you. They can scale experts. So people will get better. They will be able to do more work for less time. Productivity will boom. The problem is that there's just like, if I can sell you a product or sell you an agent that helps you produce 10 times as much value, or as much work, I should say, or output. The problem is that 10 times output does not mean 10 times more value. The market might not bear 10 times more product. So it's very deflationary, but also like there's not infinite demand for everything. So what happens when you hit those caps? And also there's competition and they all have the same tools. So I think it's very deflationary. It's not obvious that it will like generate the same amount of value that it can actually, in my mind. So I think that what happens is that it only generates the value if you offload the labor, which is why I think that there will be a massive labor disruption coming. People should get very good at working with AI. All jobs will become AI jobs. It doesn't have to be a scary thing. It is a scary thing, but it doesn't have to be. You don't have to be unprepared you don't have to be a mathematician to know how to work with AI. Expert knowledge is a real thing. It's a real value. Every individual has some unique perspective and some unique expertise. I would say get really good at honing what that is and getting AI to operate it for you. And you will find value. You will be valuable.
I mean, this is very interesting what you are saying, and actually, what are our expectations with the of AI? A couple of thoughts. If we let's say train for longevity today, and we are saying at the age of let's say 95, we would love to hike in the Alps or whatever the mountains, and we would like to carry the load, our backpack and whatsoever, and we would love to lift our grandchildren. So, what does it mean if we reverse engineer from the age of 95 to the age of 50, 55, 60, 65, right? And how much do we need to train today in order to, let's say, 40 years from now? And of course, we can't really plan for disruptions like massive pandemics or nuclear weapons, stuff like this. If we take your scenarios with, let's say, neuromorphical chips and humanity merging with machines, what does it mean if we reverse engineer from there to now? And I think, I'm always smiling when I hear about fears from AI 2027 scenario, when the agents are starting building AIs, becoming better and better, and then the world is kind of in the hands of machines. I'm like, okay, so I reside in Europe. I acknowledge. So Europe is a very, let's say, conservative when it comes to any digital technology, period. But have you seen what the legacy, so what I call the vintage infrastructure of the IT departments in companies? No,
Yes. Yes.
before we start kind of, putting, agents and whatsoever on top of it, and define ontologies, those things are um, um, maybe even better equipped against cyber attacks because they're not even in the neighborhood to let an LLM in or whatsoever. So yeah, it's kind of we don't operate from the same ground whenever scenarios we are building. And I think a very important thing is to increase AI literacy across all domains of knowledge and all population groups, right? Because then we might even define what is the future we would like to be in. And do we have an influence? So I love this movie, Her. And the most interesting thing there for me is that the guy is a writer. So he writes those love letters and friendship letters, not the AI, but he's in love with an AI. So someone decided it will be a human being writing love letters and it won't be a chatbot. So Joe, I can't thank you enough. It's really fantastic. I will put all the information about your work, your company, and all the interesting papers you are mentioning into the show notes. And frankly, I would love to bring you back because, Renaissance people on my podcast are hugely welcome.
I accept that a compliment. Thank you very much. It was fun. It was very fun. Next time we'll come back. We'll talk about longevity. I have a lot of thoughts about that too.
Fantastic. And by the way, thank you so much for mentioning cats because I am actually marketing. So what I do with the help of the real British short hair, it's not a joke. And according to my research, cat-related traffic makes 36% of all web traffic worldwide. So it's kind of good to use cats to promote out human thinking.
There you go. I love it.
Yeah, on this happy note, Joe, thank you so much and take good care and continue building what you are doing. I think you are on a very healthy path. And, I used to be a corporate executive running huge P&Ls. I would kind of, vote for use kind of systems instead of a blank LLMs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
What a powerful conversation with Joe Miller of Vivan, where we saw that the future of enterprise AI isn't just about bigger language models, but about building agents that can truly reason grounded in the real knowledge and logic of a very particular business. If there's one takeaway for every business professional listening, learning AI is no longer optional, it's imperative. Whether you're in sales, product engineering, or leadership, understanding how AI works, where it fails, and how to design systems that reason and understand is now a core professional skill. The companies that will thrive in the next decade are those where leaders and teams speak the language of AI, and they can critically evaluate what's possible and know how to build or buy systems that deliver real value and not just hype. And that's exactly why I created the Romy and Robbie series and AI Snacks, to make this knowledge accessible, practical, and human for everyone. If this episode sparked your curiosity, I'd love you to join me on this journey of AI literacy. Follow along on my website at aiedutainment.ai, where I share stories, frameworks, and practical tools to demystify AI for teams and families. Subscribe to my Substack for deeper dives into AI robotics and the future of work. Connect on LinkedIn and Instagram. My Instagram is at Romy and Robbie. And there I share behind the scenes of AI snacks, book updates, and real-world AI experiments. And if you want to bring AI literacy into your home, I invite you to pick up the first book in the Romy and Robbie series, Romy, Robbie and the Secrets of Sleep. It's a fun, story-driven AI literacy book for the whole family. You can find it on my book website, www.romyandrobbie.ai, and on Amazon, where it's already helping kids and adults alike understand how AI thinks, what it can and can't do, and how to use it wisely. Thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. Goodbye for now, and I will see you next week.